Hey everybody, and welcome back to my channel, where today we are going to be doing a full-length non-spoilery review of Abaddon's Gate by James S.A. So, Abaddon's Gate is the third book in the Expanse series, which is an adult epic science fiction series. And in this book, there is an alien type thing that has kind of made this artifact type thing out in space, and Earth and Mars and the Outer Planet Alliance, they have all decided to go and kind of study this artifact and see if maybe anything is going to happen with it, and then something happens with it and the story goes from there. Now, I know that that is an incredibly vague description, and this is a book that is incredibly hard to sum up, especially in a non-spoilery kind of way. So that is the best that I could do. But let's go ahead and jump right into world building. And I will say that I think the world building is really, really well done. Just the whole premise and like everything, all the little bits that we get about how things work in this future is really interesting, and they all seem to flow really well together. Now, for the deeper dives into world building, we do focus primarily on science as well as what it is like to live and work on a spaceship out in space, which I do find really interesting. And there's a lot of discussions around it and things that I wouldn't necessarily think of, especially because like space isn't really necessarily the technical aspects of living in space isn't really something that I think too much about, but I do think it is really interesting. It's also done in a very accessible kind of way. So I don't always understand the science conversations, but I always can pick out the gist of it, all the important bits, so that I don't feel like I'm floundering in the plot or anything like that. So they do it really, really well. So if you like science, the science is there. And if you're maybe like me and maybe don't have the science background to understand all of it, it's still okay, which I really, really appreciate. Now, I will say that, and you're going to hear this a lot in this particular video, this is really, really well done, and it's also just not quite to my personal taste. It's not generally what I like to focus on in my world building. Like, I really like social structures, economic structures, how things work in the future, especially how they work on Earth. And it's almost aggravating because we occasionally get these like offhand comments of like, oh yeah, on Earth, everybody's basic needs are taken care of. And I'm just like, oh, can we go back to that and like talk about it and what the implications of that are? But we don't. We just move on. And so I really like the world building that we get. I do find it really interesting. It's not necessarily what I would have chosen to go in depth on, though. And I do get a little bit frustrated. I don't know that frustrated is quite the right word, but I do wish we could dive more into things like on Earth, for instance. So, yes, it's really well done, just not quite personally what I would want from the world building. So, moving into the characters, and one thing that I will say, especially in this book, the authors with their like the actual technical aspects of writing and just setting up characters and everything, they have crossed the line into doing a really, really good job of doing a quick, clear sketch of the characters, especially our perspective characters, which is great. Like, I really can sum up all of the perspective characters and a number of the secondary characters as well. I can sum them up in one sentence because it was clear that some core traits were chosen out, and those characters stick to those traits in a very realistic way. I don't feel like they're out of character. I don't think that the characterization is wishy-washy in any kind of way, while also not going so over the top that it feels also not realistic. And so I think that they do a really, really good job with this, which is great because the cast of characters is huge. So in this particular book, we have 4 different perspectives, and only one perspective is a holdover from the previous books. So we're learning about 3 new characters in the beginning of this particular book. And so it's and they're not interacting with each other at the beginning either. So when they interact with others, we're also having to learn like they are secondary characters as well. So this ability to do a very quick, clear sketch of who each of the characters are is absolutely invaluable. This is actually probably the best I have ever done with such a large cast of characters. I really do struggle to keep track of a lot of characters, and I actually haven't struggled as badly with these books just because the authors really are good about the characterization. I will say, with the one perspective that's a holdover, that is Holden. And it's been really interesting because Holden has been a perspective through the first two books. So he was in the first book, the second book, and the third book. And so it's been really, really interesting to watch his growth and development. I would not say he's an amazingly complex character, although he is definitely has more depth than the other characters in this book, but he has had growth, and I really appreciated at the end when we got some reflection from him on that growth. It just really it made me happy, honestly. Now, I will say that I do have some gripes with this particular how the characters are set up. First and foremost, that like yes, we are getting more depth and growth from Holden. However, he's not a character that I'm necessarily the most attached to. I find it interesting to watch his growth, but I'm not like invested in it in any kind of way. And as for, the other characters that are new, it's a little frustrating because there are some characters that I really enjoy from like the second book, and we just don't see them at all in the third book. And I really wish we did. I wish we could spend more time with them. Um, and especially because we can develop certain relationships, but they don't ever get to like a meaningful depth, nor do we get to see them reflect on their actions or reflecting on the relationships that have been meaningful or anything like that, which is something that I personally really, really enjoy. And I will also say that setting up these characters, consistently having to set up new characters in the beginning of a book really slows it down. I mean, we're only spending, well, okay, so these books are over 500 pages. So we're only spending about 125 to 150 pages with each character. And we're rotating through the perspectives, the four different perspectives. And so, like, the first half of the book really feels just like setup, which is kind of just, honestly, it's unfortunate because it just slows everything down so much. Now, I don't think this is the primary reason why the first half of the book is slow, but it is absolutely a contributing factor. So, again, I think that with how the authors chose to do this, a large cast of characters and everything, they did an amazing job. It's just not generally how I like my characters to be. So, personal preference again. But moving into the plot. So I will say that the structure of the plot is very similar to Brandon Sanderson, or what I understand Neil Stevenson to be, where there's a lot of pieces put into place in the first half, a lot of which you may not even recognize it are plot threads or pieces to the puzzle. And then in the first or at about the halfway point, the picture starts to become a lot clearer. And then at the end, everything is kind of tied together in this really interesting, nice kind of way. Now, this is not my favorite plot structure in general, but also what I will say is between this and the fact that we're not getting a lot of character growth and such, and the world building is interesting, but we're not doing deep dives into anything new. It just made the first half so incredibly slow because we're doing a lot of plot setup without recognizing that it's like what's going to be important for the plot. So you just kind of have to follow along until it finally starts making sense. And so for me, between this and the characters, again, I found the first half to be incredibly boring because there was just nothing there for me to hold on to. And that is part of the problem with this structure, is you have to be very specific so that you don't lose half your audience, because there's just nothing interesting happening. So it kind of really needs to have some character growth and development, or like character reactions to like what happened at the end of the previous book, some deep dives into interesting world building, like not necessarily a throwaway plot line, but maybe something that doesn't have wider implications, something, but we just don't really have that. Some of the characters do have a plot line that is somewhat interesting, but again, because we're rotating through 4 different perspectives, like that's just not quite enough for it to make it the first half interesting. So, apart from my own personal feelings, I just don't actually think that this was the right choice, given the fact that they had to set up these other characters, given that they're not going to do any deep dives into world building, because it's not really like a world building kind of book where that's the primary focus. So I question the choice to use this particular structure. Now, that being said, the second half was incredibly interesting. I really liked it. I don't think that the end plot is as complex or twisty-turny as the first 2 books were, but it still was really good, and it brought together all the different pieces in really interesting ways, and I found it to be incredibly satisfying. And honestly, the ending was so fascinating. It has so many implications for what we can do going forward with this series, and I'm hooked, honestly. Like, yes, I'm a little bit frustrated by that, but like it definitely was really good. It's just I'm frustrated that I had to get through 250 pages of what felt like a whole lot of nothing to get this really good ending. I find that to be, again, not my particular cup of tea. And I will say that I question the choice of this structure, but the actual execution of this story plot structure is was done really well. So, moving into style, structure, and pacing. So, obviously, it was really slow in the beginning. It does pick up speed after the halfway point. Again, we have 4 different perspectives. And then I will say that the writing style is incredibly easy to read. It does not get super dense or bogged down anywhere with like the science. And even with the science, it is still pretty easy to figure out the gist of what they're talking about, and pick out the important parts that are going to like have implications for the plot or the characters. So I think that the writing style is just so good. So this makes this book, all of this makes this book really complicated to try to rate, because ultimately it's a well-written book that does things in a way that are not for me. And so I had to make the choice of, am I going to choose my star rating more heavily based on the quality or how much I enjoyed it? And I ultimately came down on, I'm going to rate it for quality. And the reason is because I had read the previous 2 books in the series, and like none of this is new. This was all stuff that I noticed in the first 2 books as well. And so I had a feeling that this is just how this series is going to be. And this book kind of solidified that, yes, this is just kind of how this series is going to be. And I don't feel comfortable rating or penalizing a book on the star rating when I kind of knew that this is what it was going to be anyway. So I ended up giving this 4 stars. I think my enjoyment level of the first half was somewhere between 2 and 3 stars. Of the second half, it was more like 3.5 or 4, 3.5 to 4. But quality, it is really just generally very well written. And the big question is, am I going to continue this series? Yes, I am. So the ending really is intriguing. It, like I said, it absolutely hooked me. I am interested to see what happens with these characters. I think now that we've had 3 books, we may be able to be at a point where we can kind of circle back to some of them. I'm hoping, at least. And I do find the world building and the worlds to be have a very interesting premise. So I love so much about these, and I am interested to see what happens next. So I am going to continue with this series, but I will say that this is probably not going to be a book. Book 4 is probably not going to be something that I pick up like next month. It'll be a little while just because it is hard to um, reckon with the fact that I'm going to have to like work my way through 250 pages of boringness. So yes, I will continue this series. But that is all I have. So if you have any thoughts or feelings about my review or this book, please leave me a comment down below. But that's all I have. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And until next time, have happy reading, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!